Hi everybody, thanks for buying my book, Voicing Modes. I've had people ask me to do a series of videos as a walkthrough companion to the book. Totally understandable, because if you're anything like me, you don't like to read the manual. Really, the only reason why I read it is because I wrote it. And I'll admit, this book throws you in the deep end right from page 1, and many of the concepts in this book are so interwoven that it's kind of difficult to give a step-by-step approach. So I'll give you a few introduction videos, and then hopefully it'll all start to make sense. I have a few things in the introduction that I want to go over. A good place to start would be to tell you
how to voice a mode.
Now hopefully you guys know what a mode is and what a voicing is, but let me define those really quick. A mode is just a scale relative to another scale. It's a scale that essentially has the same DNA as another scale. Let me explain. So the most common 7-note scale, the major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, has the interval structure whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And it has 6 related modes. Because there's 7 notes, it has 7 scales altogether. The second mode has the same notes, but starting from the second note. And since everything is shifted over one note, it also shifts over the interval structure, which is now whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. That's the Dorian mode, or Dorian scale. You can think of modes at first as mere children of their parent scales, and most people learn them this way. But as you grow more familiar with the new sounds, your mind and ear should start to think of and hear those new sounds as having their own unique character, a personality and emotion in their own right, as well as their own name, and even having their own tonality. A voicing is essentially a group of notes played together, or really, how you distribute those notes. You can say it's a subcategory of a chord. Let's say, for example, you have this chord, a C major triad. You can voice it like this, which is a closed root position voicing, also like this. Here's some other closed voicings. Here's the 5th in the bass, 5th in the bass, 3rd in the lowest. You can have open voicings, or they're more spread out, or even more spread out like this. It's the same chord, the C chord, just different voicings. Of course, an arranger would be expected to have a mastery of many types of voicings, because depending on the instrument that they're writing for, the timbre and the range, you'll get a different kind of energy depending on how you distribute the notes. In the same way, as a guitar player, it helps to have a mastery of voicings so that you can expand your creativity as an arranger on the guitar, or how you distribute the notes on the guitar. This is a major focus of this book, as you can see from the subheading of the book, that it says a chord voicing approach to hearing and practicing modes for comping, improvisation, reharmonization, and composition. We'll get to all that in time, but first, how to voice a mode. In other words, how to figure out how to distribute what notes in a particular scale or sound. That's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? But let's dive right in and use one of the modes of harmonic minor as an example, which that's what's in the introduction to the book, so I'll use that same sound. Let me just noodle over a harmonic minor for a second, and I'll put it in my looper. So we'll come back to this later quite a bit, but let's just hear it with an A in the bass. So that sounds pretty normal, right? A harmonic minor is a pretty familiar sound. Now if we go to the 6th mode, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it starts on the flat 6. That scale is called Lydian sharp 9. To come up with voicings for that sound, the first thing you want to do is figure out the intervals from the perspective of that note, the root of the sound you're on, rather than the intervals related to the parent scale. So the parent scale, A harmonic minor, has the intervals whole step, half step, whole step, half step, augmented second, half step. Augmented second is the same as the step and a half. But if you're thinking from the perspective of A, it's just 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, major 7. Now, if we're thinking from F, we want to change those numbers. Instead of starting on the flat 6, we want to call that 1. So it's going to be 1, sharp 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, and major 7. So now the F is now the center of gravity. So we're defining everything by F instead of by A. Now we can still use our muscle memory of A harmonic minor, assuming you've practiced that a lot more. But I want your mind and your ear to think that is the center of gravity, or the tonality. So now that's how we get the name Lydian sharp 9. Scales have names, and they're usually referring to what's like one of the modes of the major scale. And this is most similar to the fourth mode of the major scale, the Lydian scale. It has one exception, though. It has a sharp 2 or a sharp 9. So that's why they call it Lydian sharp 9 or Lydian sharp 2. What can we do with these intervals? How can we make chords from it? What chords should we make out of it? Well, you have to ask yourself, how much color do I want? How much of the sound of the scale do I want to reveal in the chord? What style am I playing? And kind of really what is appropriate? The voicing provides the context, or the sonic canvas by which all the other notes are heard. So to choose a voicing is to deem certain notes more important than others, or to put it another way, to make certain notes in the scale chord tones and the rest of the notes as color tones or tension notes. Now, to conceptually give you more options, let me give you this analogy that I like, and it seems to work. It's my food analogy. It's also this thing that's in the beginning of the book. So there's 3 types of foods. British food, French food, and Indian food. And you can think of all the intervals in a sound as ingredients. And depending on the chef, they'll make different foods out of those ingredients. So let's start with British food. When I say British food, I mean traditional meat and potatoes type stuff. Everything on the plate is functional. It's pragmatic. You got meat and potatoes, right? The meat is for your protein. The potatoes are for your starch, your energy, and the 2 veg for your roughage and vitamins, or vitamins. Those are like triads and basic 7th chords. Every note in the progression is useful and supposed to resolve or come from somewhere. Let me give an example. Stuff like that. Every note is meant to go somewhere. Like the third of this wants to resolve up to the tonic. There's a lot of harmonic gravity in each note. Okay, and then the 7th of the 5 wants to resolve down to the 3rd, and so on. Now, when I say it's supposed to, of course, there's a lot of variety in that food and that music, and it's beautiful. It's most historically used in Western music. So I don't mean to say it's lesser value than other styles. Next, there's French food. It may have a protein and a starch at the bottom of the plate, but a lot more thought goes into the sauce and the garnish because those things are essential to the dish. There's no English word for sauce chef, but in French it's saucier. These are like your extended chords and most idiomatic jazz voicings. It's still stacked in thirds, which incidentally I probably should have mentioned. That's called tertian. Tertian means stacked in thirds. That's the most traditional way to make a chord. So it needs the root and 3rd and 7th in the lower part of the voicing, but it also needs more color up top, like the 9th, 11th, 13th, etc. So here's an idea of like a progression. It's still used in progressions, like a 2, 5, 1. So you might have like more color tones on top. Here's the 3rd and 7th of the 5 chord, but you need, there's a 13 and a 9th. have a 6/9, 6 on top or something like that. So stuff like that. Now the next style of food that I mentioned is Indian food. Now, if you ask an Indian chef how you make a particular kind of curry, for instance, they'll say you need this spice and this spice and this spice and coconut milk. And that makes the sauce. And the sauce is the essence of the dish. And it doesn't really matter whether or not it has chicken or goat or chickpeas in it, because the essence is the sauce. Now, Indian food is like modal voicings. The third and seventh are not necessary because it's not supposed to resolve or go anywhere. It can just kind of sit there for extended periods of time for the sound to be savored. This is used in vamps or more modern modal jazz tunes. So what was previously considered an upper extension in the British food and French food chords is now an essential part of the voicing, and you put it in the lower part of the voicing. Things like sus chords, or say, here's one. It's a what I call essential Phrygian. It has 1, flat 2, 4, and 5. I call it essential Phrygian. There's a whole chapter on this, so check it out. We'll get to it later. All right, let's get back to the Lydian sharp 9 scale, and we can try these different methods. So the tertian, or stacked in thirds thing, we can start that again. The Lydian sharp 9, 1, sharp 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, and 7. If we go 1, 3, 5, we got a root, major third, and perfect fifth. And that makes up an F major triad. So you remember how I did that A harmonic minor stuff in the loop before? Here's what it sounds like over an F major triad. So it's pretty interesting sound because you don't get a whole lot of the sound from just that F major triad. Your ear is probably used to something else, an Ionian or Lydian, or even a dominant, a mixed Lydian. But now that you have these other notes played in context, it's like, whoa, that's like kind of cool. Now, if we can express more of the sound, if we play more notes of the scale in a chord, and we can keep going in thirds, the tertian method, we go 1, 3, 5, 7, we got a major 7. Let's see what that sounds like. If we go up another third, we get the sharp 9. Now we've got something that's like kind of unique, because there's a whole bunch of major 7s, right? That's a pretty common chord, but major 7 sharp 9, now we're getting more specific to the uniqueness of this sound. It's kind of like finding something new about your date after like the 5th or 6th date. You're like, whoa, I didn't know you had 6 toes on your left foot. Well, now you do. See what it sounds like. Pretty cool, right? If you go up another third interval, we get to the sharp 11. So we got root, third, fifth if you need it. I'm leaving it out here. You can actually leave out the fifth. Pretty commonly in most jazz tunes, if there's a lot of extensions. I should say that as a guitar player, we've got a maximum of 6 notes that we can play on a 6-string guitar. And so you sort of have to choose your notes carefully. And that's why it's important to learn lots of cool voicings. That way you can get good sounds right away. If we got 1, 3, 7, and then sharp 9, and then sharp 11, that's that sound. Interestingly, this up top, the 7, the sharp 9, and the sharp 11 make up an E major triad. So you can do this kind of thing where you've got a top half of the voicing and a bottom half of the voicing, and you can invert them separately. So you got this E up top that you can invert like that, just closed position triads. And you can try to play some of the notes of an F major triad down below. So you can do something like this. Sorry. So that's 6 out of the 7 notes of that scale. So it's really expressing a lot from that scale. We can do one more. We can go up to the 13. That would be a 7-note chord. I'm leaving out the 5th. So yeah, that would basically give you all the notes in one fell swoop. So there wouldn't really be much mystery in the chord. I mean, the chord itself is it's a pretty unique sound. But again, we're expressing the overall sound in one fell swoop. Like I said before, guitar players have to choose their notes carefully. And if you try to play too many notes, it can sound muddy. So you can skip some notes and kind of leave some mystery in the chord itself and leave it up to the context to define the sound. Here's an example. You can just play a shell voicing 1, 3, 7. Like I said, you can just not play the 5th. And you can maybe skip directly to the sharp 11. You can just play a major 7 sharp 11. Or you can play a 1, 3, 7 with a 13 on top. So here's something like that. Or you can take the 13 and you can put it in the lower part of the voicing and you can call it a 6. So it's like a major 7 with a 6 in it. I call this the magic 6th voicing. And there's a whole chapter in the book on this because it's super cool. We get to that later. We'll get to that later. But check it out. The magic 6th. So we don't have to just stick to tertian chords. You remember the Indian food thing? Well, we can do more using that method where we take the upper extensions and put them in the lower part of the voicing. But this particular scale has some really interesting coincidences. It has some notes that are enharmonically equivalent to other common triad notes. Enharmonic means it sounds the same, but written differently in an equal tempered system. If we choose to voice the sharp 2, instead of the 3rd, we get a 1 sharp 2 5. Now 1 sharp 2 5 is enharmonically equivalent to 1 flat 3 5, which is a minor triad. So check that out. You can play F minor over this. And we could play the 7th on top of that, the major 7th. So we got an F minor major 7. And then we could also, play the minor triad and put a 6 in there. We got a minor 6. So this is also kind of intriguing because now you have this minor chord, but there's a major third in the sound. Now, after your ear kind of gets used to it, it doesn't sound off, it doesn't sound out. It just sounds like interesting. So your ear can kind of get used to the context. What if we voice the sharp 2 and the sharp 4 instead of the 3 and 5? Check it out. We have the equivalent of a diminished triad. Let's hear what F diminished triad sounds like over A harmonic minor stuff. And if you add the 6th, which is enharmonically equivalent to a double flatted 7th or a diminished 7th, you get a fully diminished 7th chord. I don't know if you've thought of playing that over a diminished chord, but it's actually a pretty common sound. Now, those are just the commonly used chords, too. I'm sure you could come up with more possibilities, like this weird chord, a minor triad with a sharp 4 in there. And also, keep in mind, you don't have to just stick to one voicing. You can play multiple voicings and maybe go back and forth, like a vamp or even a cadence. For example, we can choose these two, F minor triad and an A sus. Even come up with some cool lick that's based on those two triads. You can get creative with this. And how about this diminished 7th chord to major 7th chord? That's actually a pretty common cadence in jazz, in popular music. Billy Strayhorn tunes, Jobim tunes use it a lot. It's like the parallel diminished 7th to major 7th. You can play the Lydian sharp 9 mode over it. Actually, these two chords encompass all 7 notes of that sound. Things in you might have heard it in like a flavoring a 2-5-1. Or in Corcovado. Here's what it sounds like, those two chords over A harmonic minor. It's pretty common. The cool thing about finding one sound that covers two seemingly unrelated chords is that you can make one big long phrase. It's easier to connect your melodies because you don't have to sort of start a new solo on each chord or a new idea on each chord or start from the bass. Which kind of sounds goofy. One of my favorite guitar players, John Abercrombie, in a clinic, he said, if it's not easy, it doesn't sound right. And this is one way to conceptually make things easier when performing. Keep in mind, something exotic and new to you is likely related to something very familiar.